when they made the slaves free, it was like making a candy bar free. You don't got to pay for it no more. Now they make us think that when they made the slaves free, that they cut them loose, but that ain't true, because if you free a slave, you don't call him a slave no more, you call him a free man. So ain't no such thing as a free slave. The only such thing as a free slave is one you don't gotta purchase. Guess what happened, y'all? All of the slave masters used to bid on slaves, and these bids would go up to astronomical prices, man, and that slave may die in another month. And what they found out is that the system of obtaining a slave was flawed, because it works against the slave masters. If we're gonna be competing with each other, trying to outbid the next one on a slave, then we're gonna be paying a lot of money. It's just, so they found out a way to make slaves free, as in we don't gotta pay for them anymore. And that way was, think about this, right? The whole thing about how they did it was, most of the cost in acquiring a slave was shipping costs, just like today. This was a imported product, and then you had slaves that was already here. But the thing about this whole thing was, every slave had stat sheets, just like a running back. We know how many touchdowns he scored. We know how fast he can run. We know how much he can bench press. So you got to think that was a dude's job to keep up with all this paperwork. You got to picture all this paperwork in your head. Guess what? That was the job of the masters. They was also had the problem of bidding, which was making them pay more for slaves, and they had the tedious task of keeping tracks and stats of all these slaves. So they changed it, and they made the slave keep track of his own paperwork, and that's why y'all make resumes today. The slave now show up with his own stats in his own hand, and he knock on master's door and say, look, I can lift this much, I do this much, boom, boom, boom. They see how they consolidated. Wow. and then guess what? Now they don't even got the bid for slaves no more, because the price of slaves was going up so high, it cost you so much, it was against the whole institution of slavery. So what they did was they said, we got to devalue these slaves, because right now they're black gold. We got to be able to make them cheap and disposable. And that's how they did it, by just letting the slaves go lead the plantations. And guess what? The thing was, they wasn't freeing them. They was making them free, because the slaves was working for food, clothing, and shelter. So now when we kick them out of their houses and shit, they're gonna show back up at my doorstep begging me to motherfucking work for food, clothing, and shelter. And they're responsible for keeping track of their own work history and all that themselves. Like, they really changed the game with what people think Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. He made them, yeah, he did. He made them free. Well, they ain't gotta buy them no more. After the so-called slaves were made free, they ended the auctions and ended the bidding of slaves. But slavery continued and still is alive and well today. They changed the structure of it. Yeah.